Good evening, everyone. So we're from Group 7 and we're going to discuss relatives. Now we have here our agenda wherein we were going to give definition and the function and the evidences and lastly the solutions. Now let's go to the definition. Okay, let's define a relative. Now, when we say relative, it is the key markers for relative clauses. It is a type of dependent clause, where dependent clauses are the group of words that contains a subject and verb but does not express a complete thought. So, a relative is one which is used to refer to nouns mentioned previously. Whether they are people, places, things, animals, or ideas, relative pronouns can be used to join two sentences. Now, we have here the most common relative pronouns. Now we have who, whom, that, which, whose, whoever, and whomever. Now let's go to the difference of interrogative and relatives. Okay, so you might be wondering what is the difference of these two. When we say interrogative, it is a word or sentence used when asking a question. So the basic function of an interrogative sentence is to ask direct question. On the other hand, relative is all about modifying a nominal word, phrase, or clause. Overall, interrogative always ends with question mark, and the latter is just a key marker. Now let's proceed to the functions.
The function of relatives. So number one, it introduces a relative clause, connects the additional information to the main idea of the sentence, and third, or number three, it modifies the subject of the sentence. So overall, it introduces, it connects, and it modifies. Relative clauses functions as subordinate or dependent clauses and therefore cannot stand alone as complete sentences. The relative pronoun is used to connect the relative clause to an independent clause by referring to the noun or the pronoun being modified.
So, moving on, we have here different evidences for the proper placement of relatives in a sentence. Next. So, our first example, the man who is seated beside the host is the guest. So, let's see what will happen if we put the relatives as the initial word. Who the man is seated beside the host is the guest. So, we can see here that the message is unclear. The second one, if we put the relatives as a penultimate word, the man is seated beside the host is the who guest. We can see here that the message is still unclear. But what if we put the relatives as the final word? The man is seated beside the host is guest who. Still, the message is unclear. But if we put the relatives as the middle word, it will become the man who is seated beside the host is the guest. We can see here that the message of the phrase is so clear and understandable. So for the second example, we went to the village which Lucy recommended. So just like the first example, if we put the relatives as the initial word, penultimate word, and the final word, the message of the phrase will become unclear. But if we put it as the middle word, it will become understandable. So it will become we went to the village which Lucy recommended. Next. So another examples to differentiate relatives and interrogatives. We have here an example of relative sentence, which is the man who is seated beside the host is the guest. And for interrogative sentence, we have who is the man seated beside the host. Next.
So we now proceed to the concluding part of the presentation, the syntactic environment of relatives. So here we have the solution. So in the first one, we have the subject, the symbol for relative, which is enclosed in a bracket, the relative clause, which is underlined, indicating that it is a filler. These are words that are needed to complete the sentence, and then followed by the object. In the second one, we have the subject followed by the object, the symbol for relative enclosed in a bracket, and then the relative clause. So in the first one, relatives are placed after the subject followed by the relative clause and the object. In the second one, relatives can also be placed after the object followed by the relative clause. So that's it for our presentation. These are our references. Thank you for listening.